welcome everyone, and welcome to the folks in our first classroom. We have a remote TV set up there so they don't have to come up the stairs. So hi, you guys. So welcome everyone. Have you noticed we are now 2 days past the Earth's trip around the sun, where it's in perfect balance? Do you notice the symmetry of our wonderful environment geologically? Do you notice the winds sweeping through, cleansing our atmosphere? And the warmth of the sun drawing forth new life, and the little critters and birds scurrying around to make way for their young to come. It is a marvel, is it not? So let's hear it from Mother Earth, Gaia. And Kathy?
I light the Christ candle that reminds us that there is the Spirit of God lives within our hearts and in our souls. Yay, God.
Now, today is the third installment and final installment of this series of a closer look at the life of Yeshua. So the first one was about starting at the end of Jesus' life and going backward, and how we need to be receptive, like the people, his followers, did not receive him that easily in his resurrected state. We must be open and receptive to the living Christ presence. And then last week was the resistance that he met from his own people to understanding his teachings. And we must be willing to open our hearts and see the meaning and the spiritual opportunity of Jesus' work. But now today, I really want the final closer look for now is looking at the wisdom of Yeshua and the healing miracles of Yeshua. Now, do you recall that it was said that Solomon was the wisest man in the world when he was the king of Israel, and he had the Queen of Sheba came to see if he indeed was all that wise, and he, as a judge, he ruled over the claim of two women who claimed the same baby, and he said, well, let's just cut the baby in half, and then the real mother gave it up. So that was a great demonstration, a display of wisdom. But look at Jesus's was even more amazing. In Mark 12:16, it's also in Matthew and Luke, but I like the Mark rendition, where they sent him some Pharisees and Herodians, meaning government people, to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? And should we pay them or should we not?" But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it." And they brought one, and he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Jesus said to them, "Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were utterly amazed at him. Yeah. I like the more traditional, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." And has not that saying lasted throughout 2,000 years as a boundary, as a maxim that clarifies exactly where our loyalties lie and what is righteous to do? And then I've mentioned this before, but I just have to touch on this. When the woman was taken in adultery, and that's only in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, it says a woman was taken in adultery, and they asked him, "What do you say? Should we stone her?" And he says, "Let him who is without sin among you cast the first stone." And they all walked away. I went to see one time a showing of the first King of Kings movie that was ever made. Cecil B. DeMille directed it. It was a silent movie. It was the first Bible story movie that Hollywood produced. And in his interpretation, when Jesus wrote on the ground, it says Jesus wrote in the dirt before he said, "Let who is without sin." And what he wrote in the movie was what they had done wrong. Thief, whatever, different things that he could see in them, in their souls, that they had sinned, that they had done wrong, and that made it even more powerful, that they couldn't claim to be without sin and cast a stone. And so I want to get this, what he said to her, John 8, he said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and do not sin again." So beautiful. And the wisdom, talking about the wisdom of Yeshua, the wisdom in his prayer, when he taught them to pray in the Sermon on the Mount. There are two different versions, but the Matthew is it's a little bit more complete. And when you see the profound simplicity of this prayer, this is all you need to do to expand your connection with Spirit. He says, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then in this way. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one." Has that prayer lasted these thousands of years? Does it not restore us every day to alignment with truth? To know that we can trust God who knows what we need before we ask. When he was sending the disciples out to preach, teach, and heal, he told them in Matthew 10:16, "Be wise as serpents, gentle as doves." Is that not good advice for everybody going anywhere on a mission? Yeah. Beautiful language. I've taken that with me everywhere I went, and I invite you to. Be wise as the serpent, gentle as the dove. And then, it's in Matthew, it's in, and in Mark, I believe, where, it's been misunderstood. When children wanted to come see Jesus, and the disciples said, "No, stay away, we don't want any children around here. Too noisy, too messy." And he said, no, don't make them go away. Let them come. Because unless you receive the kingdom of God as a little child, you shall in no wise enter therein. That's been misunderstood. What he was saying was, unless you are as a little child, meaning innocent, willing, open, teachable, you cannot receive this truth. But what great wisdom there is in that saying, and it honors children so much. And then of course, all of his teachings on the kingdom of heaven is like, what is he talking about? And he was trying to explain to them something that was what we can now call consciousness that he didn't have the word for then. And one of the most poignant is in Matthew 13:33, where he's talking about the leaven. And I want to read that to you. And then I've got one from the Gospel of Thomas. The kingdom of heaven is like. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like the yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. That's it. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed it with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. And his point is that the kingdom of heaven is a consciousness phenomenon which an idea of truth completely permeates and infuses when we place it there. And I love this, the Gospel of Thomas, just found in our century, where, the Gospel of Thomas doesn't have any narrative. It's only Jesus said this, Jesus said that. And here's one that really holds together for me. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a woman who takes a vessel of flour and sets out on a long road. The handle of the vessel broke. The flour spilled out on the road behind her without her knowing it and stopping it. When she arrived at the house, she put the vessel down and found it was empty. That is so counterintuitive to how we think. We think of, we've got to have all that grain in that jar. Well, if it spilled out, we've lost it, and now we're home, and oh dear. No, he was making the point that if you keep your focus on your spiritual home, that your burdens will drain away effortlessly. Have you found that to be true? It is true. So now I want to talk about the healing miracles of Jesus and how poignant, how compassionate, how extraordinary they are, but not beyond our grasp. As we get more and more scientifically expanded in our recent discoveries, we find that the ability to command matter is a property of consciousness. So Jesus was fully realized in that dynamic. He could command matter. So if you look at your program folder, there's a picture of one of the healing miracles on the front. And it's the miracle of the widow's son being raised. How many of you are familiar with that? It only appears in the Gospel of Luke, which is unusual because, usually anything that's in Luke is at least in Matthew or Mark. So it's only in Luke, which was the common man's gospel. So Jesus went to Nain, to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went with him. As he approached the gate of the town, a man who had died was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow, and with her was a large crowd from the town. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion for her. He had compassion for her. And he said, "Do not weep." Then he came forward and touched the bier, and the bearers stood still, and he said, "Young man, I say to you, rise." The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized all of them, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has looked favorably on his people." This word about him spread throughout Judea and all the surrounding country. Boy, can you imagine what the excitement and buzz was? This man healing, teaching, preaching with great wisdom, with great power. So there's no real template for the healings, although it is frequent that before he would actually perform a healing, he would ask the person, "Do you believe I can do this? Do you believe this is possible?" And then he would say, "But by your faith, you have become whole. Your own faith has made you whole." I love the story of the woman who was what we would call hemorrhaging. She'd been many years in that state. They call it the issue of blood. And this is in Matthew 9:20-22. It's in Mark and it's in Luke. And she's saying, I know if I just touch his garment, I will be healed. And it says that he felt power pass out of him. That is not to say he felt drained. No. He felt movement. He felt activity. And he stopped and he says, who touched me? And his disciples said, how can we tell who touched you in this big crowd? He said, I want to know who touched me. And she came forward and she said, I did. And he said, your faith has made you whole. Even then, he was teaching the people that it wasn't by his power alone, but by the power of their own faith that healing can happen. He healed a man with a withered hand, a person who was paralyzed, an epileptic. That epileptic healing, that is really dramatic. The disciples were trying to do it, and they couldn't do it. Let me read you that account. Matthew 17:14. And it's also in Mark and Luke. You know, a lot of times these are called, having a demon or an evil spirit. I have to say that just like the song I Believe, in my earlier days when I scoffed at that kind of language, saying that's archaic, it's not metaphysical, probably not factual. And yet, I see more and more that if everything is energy, that there can be a negative state, a negative energetic state, which amounts to the same thing as being possessed by an evil spirit. So here we have the epileptic, Matthew 17:14. He says, when they came to the crowd, a man came to him, knelt before him, and said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and he suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him. Jesus answered, you faithless generation, how much longer must I be with you? How much longer must I do this? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was cured instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? He said to them, because of your little faith. For truly I tell you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. He healed the demon-possessed, the men who were at the edge of town, and the demons in them recognized Jesus' power and said, put us into those swine. And he did, and the swine ran over the edge of the cliff, and Jesus was asked to leave the city. But isn't it interesting that those demons recognized Jesus? So the Pharisee's daughter, he raised her from the dead. A Pharisee came to him, this was early on in the ministry, and said, my daughter has just died, she was 12. That was one of the pictures I wanted to put on the cover because it's so tender. And he comes to her house and they're all grieving because she has died, and he said, no, she's only sleeping. And they laughed at him, and he went in and he said, arise. And she got up, and she was whole and well and beautiful. The centurion's servant, where the centurion came to Jesus and said, will you heal my slave? He's very important to me. I care deeply for him. And Jesus said, I'll come right away. And he said, no, you don't have to come. I know you have the authority to heal him from right where you are. And Jesus said, I have not seen such faith, even among my own people. Go thy way. your servant is healed. So Jesus worked in this realm of consciousness where he could command the nature of the physical realm to come into alignment with perfect life. He could call forth perfect life, wholeness in anything. Well, I want to say that to be a Christian is to do all these things. Do you believe it? Every day we are healing the sick, raising the dead, preaching the good news. How? By being positive, by remaining positive, by standing in the perception of only good, committing to only love, forgiving all separation states, fear, jealousy, loneliness, anger, despair, guilt, shame. You feel the energy go down as I say each one of those negative states. The overcoming of negative states is as simple as turning a light on in the dark. It's not a fight, as Hollywood would have us believe. It's a resurrection. It's a raising of consciousness. We keep forgetting that we are the cause of our lives. We are causing our own lives. We are causing our experience. It's so easy to give our power away to outer influences. That is why it is so important to understand this one teaching of Yeshua. Your Father knows what you need before you ask. I'll tell you, just like looking back on these songs and different teachings that I didn't think held water, and now I see the fullness of their meaning, takes some perspective and maturity to see that. I hope you have had the experience. Have you ever looked back on an experience of your life and see that Spirit, the divine God, provided something you needed that you didn't even know you were going to need, and there it was? And so I saw that recently for me when I got separated from my husband and I moved back to Maryland. He stayed in California. My parents were selling their house and moving to an apartment, so I rented their house. And then my mother died that year. And my father moved back in the house with us, but he decided he wanted to live in a senior center. So I had to find someplace else to live. I had met a girl, a woman who became my best friend, and she had rented a house. And she thought she was going to share it with somebody, but that fell through. And she came to me and said, "Diane, would you rent this house with me? I need somebody to rent it with me. I can't afford it myself." And I said, "Yeah, sure." I didn't even ask where it was. I didn't know where my father was going to go and live. What? It turned out that out of the whole area of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, my father went to live in a senior center that was around the corner and up the street from the house that she was renting. And so I was close, within a stone's throw, to my father all during my childhood, which was a tremendous asset and a tremendous gift to all of us. I didn't even ask for that. I didn't even know I was going to need it, but there it was. We don't need to look in the outer for our needs to be met. We need to trust the partnership that we are in with Spirit. This partnership has no carbon footprint. I'm being a little facetious here, okay? This partnership, it's 100% sustainable. It is consistent, coherent, and cooperative. It's inexpensive. It's non-invasive. It's non-violent. But this partnership consumes your entire life, even your dreams, even your sleep, because it's consciousness itself being infused with the divine. Energetically, it's transcending your own boundaries and engaging with what the mystics call the Great Awakening. You don't have to go anywhere to find it. You don't have to buy anything to have it. You don't have to sacrifice any happiness to experience it. Quite the opposite. Yeshua was able to do the things that he did because in consciousness he was in partnership with the infinite. And so can you be. When you give your hand, put the hand in the hand of the man, when you give your hand to this partnership and take up the road of faith, you can't continue to judge. You can't continue to criticize, to resist. Energetically, the two states are mutually exclusive. This is why this guru who calls himself the Sadguru, it's not sadness about being sad, it's just his name, Sad, S-A-D-H. He says the only thing we need to do to solve all our problems is to raise the consciousness of humanity. This means you. We are here in this room today because Yeshua called us by his acts of extreme wisdom, his acts of extreme positive power. Today we face different kinds of challenges: pervasive despair and alienation, technical skill and economic skill without vision. But the answer is still the same. That's what we seem to miss. We know the answers. We have the answers. We need to live the answers. You have the choice to live that answer. It matters what you choose. Choose love. Choose wholeness. Choose light. Choose compassion. Amen. Thank you. So let's take some good deep breaths. Get in a good, relaxed, comfortable position. It kind of determines your attitude, your hands and feet being receptive and relaxed, and especially your jaw and your neck. So consciously relax and infuse with oxygen and light your entire being. Becoming consciously at one with the one. Becoming consciously filled with love, light, and power. With the energy that is of the divine. The frequency that is high, mighty, and positive. Our statement for meditation is, my partnership with the Spirit is the light of my life. So let's say that together now. Together. My partnership with Spirit is the light of my life. And take that deep into our hearts. And as we remain in this secret place of the Most High, to receive, to be inspired, to be guided, to be uplifted, we now rest in the silence. Thank you, Divine Presence, for your truth radiating throughout our entire lives. Thank you. Amen.